A reality is just what we tell each other it is. Sane and insane could easily switch places if the insane were to become the majority. You would find yourself locked in a padded cell, wondering what happened to the world.
All right, it's Friday and we're doing another movie review. Doing another John Carpenter movie and another Lovecraftian movie, as it happens.
Yeah, part of our little Lovecraft series.
Yeah, we just kind of ended up watching a lot of sort of Lovecraftian horror on Tubi, so that's how we ended up doing this. And we love John Carpenter, so we end up doing a lot of John Carpenter movies. Somebody actually suggested that we do, like, director retrospectives. Mm-hmm. You know, like we could do a John Carpenter one, we could do... Although, I don't know, that might be kind of redundant because we've done so many of his movies. Well, we kind of... At least in his case.
We kind of recap... You know, what's happening with directors usually whenever we talk about an individual film that they're doing.
That's what I mean. So it might be kind of redundant.
It's kind of redundant. I think it's kind of redundant. And that way a person who's just looking for a review of this film can find additional information. Although Carpenter doesn't really need an introduction, I don't think.
No, but it's at least not in the horror community, for heaven's sakes. And,
right.
You know, this is a kind of another movie, and I mentioned this when we reviewed Body Bags, which came out in 1993, that, you know, I had always been kind of under the perception that, well, you know, They Live from 1988 was the last movie of his that I really liked, but then I was like, oh, Body Bags, I forgot about that one. That came out in 1993. And for some reason, I always forget about this one, too. I don't forget about the movie per se. It's just that sometimes, for whatever reason, I forget that John Carpenter directed it. Right. And it is In the Mouth of Madness, which came out in 1995. First, I'm not really entirely sure why I have this weird kind of disconnect, like why I always forget that this is a John Carpenter movie. Maybe it's because... I don't want to say it's unlike any of his other movies. It's sort of a different theme, but not. It's kind of hard to explain. Even though...
I don't think he wrote it.
No, he didn't.
Okay.
I'll get into that. Yeah, I'll get into that in a little bit. This is actually considered unofficially the third film in his quote-unquote apocalypse trilogy. First of those being The Thing, and second of those being Prince of Darkness, which, meh. Yeah. You know, I've said how I feel about that. Oh, we should do a show on it just because.
Yeah, I want to get it as part of that metal books or that steel book series that I have. So we'll do a show on it.
It's one that I want to like, but she seems like every time I rewatch it, like I give it another chance, and it seems like a cool idea, but in a way it seems like too many ideas, or it was like too clumsily
He was making it up as he was going
along. Yeah, it kind of felt like that.
Yeah.
Now, this one is kind of different, though, and In the Mouth of Madness seems to be one of those movies in the horror community that is either love it or hate it. Mm-hmm. Now, I have seen some people online that have made the very bold statement that In the Mouth of Madness is their favorite Carpenter movie.
I have to go back and see it again.
Which, like I said, when your filmography includes The Thing and Halloween and Escape from New York, I mean, I wouldn't go that far.
Yeah, I don't see how this can beat The Thing. The Thing is a masterpiece.
But I can see how it can be one of your favorite ones, right. Carpenter ones, because I definitely think it's one of his better movies, and easily, probably his best movie of the 90s. Not that there's a lot of competition in that area.
I mean, the movie has Cheston in it, but it doesn't have Crussell, though. I mean, if Crussell isn't in it, it's not a Carpenter flick. It's not an iconic Carpenter flick, if you ask me.
Well, Crussell wasn't.
It does not fulfill.
Crussell wasn't in Halloween.
It does not fulfill my Crussell man crush. It just doesn't.
Well, I'm very sorry about that.
It's okay. I'm gonna let it slide.
Okay.
No, it's a good flick, though.
Yeah, this movie, like I said, it's very Lovecraftian. Actually, John Carpenter did not direct it, or did not write it, rather. It was written by Michael DeLuca, who at the time was the head of New Line Cinema,
right.
Or head of production. He actually went on to direct some pretty well-regarded films. He did, I think he did the fifth Freddy movie, I want to say, but he actually got some Oscars. He did Blade, he did Boogie Nights, he did Austin Powers, Magnolia, American History X, stuff like that. So, you know, he's the one that wrote this story. He actually wrote it in the late 80s. About 88 or 89. He first offered it to Carpenter, but Carpenter said no. So then he offered it to another director named Tony Randell, who had done Hellraiser 2. And that guy kind of worked on it for a little while and said, fuck that, I don't want to do it. And then it was offered to Mary Lambert, who's probably most famous in the horror community for directing Pet Sematary. And she was kind of attached to it for a little while, but then it didn't work out. And then finally, in the 90s, and about 92, Carpenter said, okay, I'll do it. Now, the story is it's one of those ones, it seems like the 90s, particularly in the horror genre, was very into metafictions.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like Wes Craven had done The New Nightmare, I think it was, yeah. Where there was like this thing where the Freddy and all the characters from the Nightmare on Elm Street movies were so popular that it was starting to bleed into reality and affecting the lives of the actors. So it was kind of like a meta fiction way too. You had stuff like Scream and things like that were kind of self-referential. So this was kind of along the same line where they were kind of blurring the line between what was fiction and what was reality.
Yeah.
But this one had a much larger scope. I mean, this was like a world-ending, apocalyptic kind of story, which Carpenter likes those.
Yeah. And at the end, it got real meta, like you watching this movie are now going to be affected by this, that this is the movie version of the book that this guy is writing and you're in this somehow. Yeah, it's pretty weird.
Yeah, so it's kind of one of those things where...
If you see it, you understand. I know that doesn't make any sense to see the movie. But...
Well, it's one of those movies where if you like horror movies that are, very straightforward and very explained and, everything has a reason and stuff like that, then probably you're not going to roll with this. Because one criticism I see is, it doesn't make any sense.
It makes sense.
It does, though. Yeah. But it's like, what's real and what's not.
Yeah.
And all this other kind of shit.
It makes sense, but I'm watching it and I know that I'm missing certain details.
Yeah.
It's something that you have to view a couple times to get a full grip on what's happening.
Yeah, there's a really lot going on.
A lot of stuff
and then
happens.
There's a lot of, references to other things.
And they're trying to meta you out in certain ways. Like, well, when you see it, you'll know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and I mean, the whole thing, we'll kind of, go into the plot a little bit. Yeah. Sam Neill is John Trent. That's the main character. And I actually love that they got Sam Neill to be this character because this story gets so crazy. I mean, the whole thing is just about insanity and about the lines between reality and fiction blurring. So they had to get somebody that was a believable, skeptical guy that is just not going along with any of this shit.
Right.
Until he doesn't really have a choice. And I think he really sells it.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about this, and this was something that I think John Carpenter said maybe on the commentary of this movie, that Sam Neill decided he was going to play this character as though he was in a comedy.
Okay.
And it actually works pretty well, I think. It's almost like a throwback to a film noir type of character. Yeah. He's like a private dick. He's an insurance investigator. And he's very world weary. And he's very like, what is this shit? Everything's a scam. Everything sucks. It's like, he's just kind of like that. And I think that works really well because it really offsets all this crazy Lovecraftian shit that's going on in other parts of the story.
Yeah, in a weird way, the movie's about Stephen King ending the world in a certain way.
Yeah, that's a very succinct way of putting it.
That Stephen King is actually writing books that are bringing about the apocalypse and the return of the old ones from Lovecraftian.
Yeah, they're coming from this other dimension. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the writer that this guy, because John Trent, the main character, he's played by Sam Neill. He is hired by Arcane Publishing, which is headed by the Cheston.
Yeah, Cheston.
To go and find this super ridiculously popular best-selling horror author named Sutter Kane, who has disappeared before he was supposed to turn in the final manuscript of his new book, which they've already pre-sold. They've already sold the movie rights, all this other kind of stuff, and now they don't know where he went.
And of course, Sutter Kane, it means Stephen King.
Yeah.
SK. That's
even if you look at all the book covers of his that they show and the thing, they use the same fonts,
yeah,
and the same font design, the way they have the S and the K, or the S and the J big and stuff.
Yeah.
And the titles of all of Sutter Kane's books are like Lovecraft story titles, but just one word off.
Right.
You know what I mean? So he's almost like an amalgam of Stephen King and H.P. Lovecraft.
Right.
So, John Carpenter here, or Michael DeLuca, I guess, since he's the one that wrote the story, he's kind of making a commentary on writers whose work becomes so big that
starts affecting reality.
Starts bleeding into reality.
Yeah.
Because the whole thing about Sutter Kane is that apparently he's this writer of these Lovecraftian fictions, and the more people believe that his stuff is real, the more it's able to manifest itself in reality.
Yeah, and that's that. He's probably also kind of making a callback to Lovecraft himself, because in Lovecraft's day, when he was writing all these mythos and these books, they had people that actually believed this was real, and that Lovecraft was somehow channeling all this. They wanted to know where the Necronomicon was and that kind of stuff. There was no Necronomicon. There's just Lovecraft made that up.
Yeah.
But there was like a little cult forming around Lovecraft.
So in a way, you can kind of see where this idea comes from. That's kind of, I think, where Michael DeLuca got the idea from, which is like, you know, if enough people believe in it, does it become reality? But then there's another layer to the movie, too, because in the opening scenes, we see, because pretty much the entire movie is a flashback.
Yeah.
And it's told from John Trent's point of view. And at the beginning of the movie, John Trent is being put into an insane asylum.
Yeah.
He's going to slap him in a, what do you call it?
Mental
Straight
jacket.
And put him in a mental hospital. He draws crosses all over himself and all over the walls. And stuff like that. And he is relating what drove him crazy to Dr. Wren, who is played by David Warner, who I love. So that introduces another layer of uncertainty, because you're told from the jump that John Trent is an unreliable narrator. Is he crazy? And none of this stuff ever happened. Has the world gone crazy and the world is ending and he's the only sane person, so they slap him in an asylum, just like, which is what one of the characters says to him, you know, the midpoint of the movie. Or, you know, so it could kind of be read either way. That's kind of what makes it cool. And another thing that I want to say about this movie, like I said, some of the stuff, you know, once it seems pretty straightforward, you know, John Trent gets hired by Charlton Heston, or Cheston rather, to go and find
I got people trained to call people Cheston and Crussell.
It's easier.
In case you're a new listener, Crussell is Kurt Russell.
Yeah.
All right, I just put it together into a single word.
Yeah.
Cheston is Charlton Heston.
Yeah, you know. So it's kind of straightforward. Then he gets hired to go find this writer because he's disappeared. He's like, I need that manuscript because we've pre-sold all this stuff. The woman that goes with him, Linda Stiles, is Sutter Kane's editor. So these two try to go find him. Now, even from the beginning, John Trent has gotten threatened with an axe by Sutter Kane's former agent, who was going to kill him in a coffee shop. It was funny because John Trent's like surprisingly cool about this. Like the agent comes and like tries to get him through the window with the axe, and he's just like, all right, well, that's how that shit goes. You know, like I said, and it works very well because he's just so nonchalant about everything. Right. So he starts having like these kind of weird nightmares and stuff and visions and things. And then he figures, well, maybe if I read some of his books, then I'll figure out where he went to. Right. Now, there has been some hint earlier on in the movie that reading his books can drive some people crazy. Right? And so, which explains the agent flipping out with the axe. So as he starts reading the books, he starts seeing things and stuff. But then, like, he has all the books on his coffee table, and he notices that all the cover art makes like a little map of New Hampshire, and there's this one little spot on it. He's like, oh, well, maybe that sneaky motherfucker, maybe that's where he's at. And it turns out to be a town called Hobbs End, which is purportedly a fictional town. Yeah, it's kind of like the Castle Rock of Stephen King. It's like one that he made up. Yeah. So him and the editor, they're like, well, maybe that's where he is. He's at this spot on the map.
Yeah. But there's nothing there.
But there's no Hobbs End on the map.
Right, yeah.
So, you know, he's like, well, we'll just keep driving. Yeah.
Right.
But the weird thing is that when they start driving to it, then it's almost kind of like they go through this weird time portal, like everything goes black, and like they start seeing, like she sees this weird kid on a bicycle and stuff, like all this like really weird, unsettling imagery.
They actually get there.
And then they actually get there into this town that supposedly doesn't exist.
Yeah, so they're in a town that a dude made up and wrote. It'd be like going to Castle Rock.
Yeah, it's like that.
Right.
And all this really weird, shady shit happens there. Like I said, there's a lot of Lovecraftian kind of thing. Like all the kids look really weird and deformed. There's this really big, creepy black church, which some people I think thought was a matte painting, but that is an actual place. Wow. It's in Ontario. It's called the Cathedral of the Transfiguration. Okay. Yeah, so they filmed that there. It's like, you know, there's just all these little weird details. Like they go in this hotel, which which I love. It's run by this old lady named Mrs. Pickman, like the Lovecraft story Pickman's model. And she seems all nice and everything, and then there's all this sinister shit going on. There's like a painting in there that changes every time you look at it. It's like, I like all those kind of little details like that.
Yeah, it makes you want to see it again now that you're talking about it.
Yeah, like, you know, like there's all the dogs are like 3-legged and like everybody. And
well, don't spoil it.
Yeah, so it's like, so like I said, I kind of like all these really subtle,
and they
unsettling images.
They actually meet Sutter Kane. He's in there.
Yeah.
And he's writing books, and he's trying to finish this book. And when it's finished, it's going to bring the old ones out of their realm into our realm. And they show them.
Yeah.
They're pretty good when they show them.
So
this is all, no CG. This is all practical effects.
Yeah, pretty much. Even the monsters and stuff.
The monsters, when
I think the only CGI was kind of like the book stuff, like when Sutter Kane like tears himself up and things like that.
Maybe.
I think that might be digital.
Maybe, yeah.
But most of the creature effects and all that kind of stuff, and the really one creepy, unsettling scene where the editor gets out of the car and her head is all. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about? That was actually done with practical effects also.
And then there's a scene where they open up a door and the old ones start coming from their dimension. They show them. They look kind of like something out of The Thing. Yeah. Kinda. Really cool, though.
But like I said, the cool thing about this is that you never really know. I mean, because the whole movie is like the end of it. It's almost like an infinite loop.
Yeah, you're not sure if you're being told a story or if this is something that's really happening.
And it's almost kind of like you don't know if he was just telling you a crazy story this whole time. Did all of this stuff happen? Yeah. It's kind of like, it almost implicates the viewer.
Right.
And so I actually think it's one of the best meta horror movies.
Yeah, because it's like all this is happening. This story is happening in a book that if you read this book, it actually makes it happen.
Yeah.
And the movie that you're watching is the movie of that book.
Yeah.
So you'll see when you get there.
But yeah, that's what's so cool about it is everything is like super self-referential. Right. And and if you're really into horror, particularly Lovecraftian horror, there's a lot of like really like with the character names and stuff like that kind of refer back to it. And I think a lot of the imagery is really cool too. I mean, it's Carpenter, so he's kind of got all of that Carpenterian thing going on with his lighting and all that kind of stuff. Oh, what fun fact. You know the part where John Trent, he kind of thinks he wakes up out of it and he's like at that crossroads and there's nobody else around. And then that paper boy rides up on a bicycle. You know who that kid is?
Who?
Hayden Christensen.
Who's that? Oh, that's a gift from Star Wars.
From Phantom Menace. Yeah, not from Phantom Menace, but from when he grew up, yeah.
Right, yeah. From,
Anakin.
Anakin Skywalker.
From the prequels. Yeah, that's who that. I didn't even recognize him. Right. It's funny, but like I just saw that as some little trivial thing on the web, and I was like, okay. And it turns out it's on the Wikipedia page too, right there. But yeah. This is kind of like, it seems like one of his kind of underrated kind of movies.
Yeah, I want to see it again now that we're talking about it.
Yeah, like if you like I said,
I didn't see it when it came out. I didn't see it.
Yeah, I think I saw it maybe in the late 90s, like once it came out on cable.
That's about when I saw it.
I don't think I saw it in the theater.
And I didn't really pay close attention to it.
It's funny because when I first saw it, I don't remember seeing it in the theater. I very well may have. I did see a lot of movies back then.
It had a tone and a look of many other horror movies from that time.
Yeah.
It kind of merged in with some of the other stuff that was happening. But you look at it now, it was different.
Because like I said, there was a lot of metafiction kind of going on. You had New Nightmare. I think even Clive Barker's Lord of Illusions, that might have come out around that same time, which was, I think, if I recall, it was a similar kind of premise.
It was kind of like Jacob's Ladder a little bit.
Yeah, Jacob's Ladder, that kind of thing, where everything was, you weren't sure what was real and what wasn't, which I usually love. I love, like, ambiguous horror. So that's kind of why I really like this one. It's interesting because maybe this kind of ties back to what you said. I think horror particularly, and maybe all movies, but, since I'm kind of a horror nerd, probably this is why I'm thinking this, but I feel like horror is more appreciated later.
Yeah, it has to age.
You can't really appreciate it.
Kind of like a Cure album.
Yeah.
When a Cure album comes out, you don't really like it. And then like 5 years later, you're like, that was an awesome album.
Yeah, it needs some time to stew. Not always. Yeah. Like sometimes some horror movies I think are better appreciated in the cultural time, that they came out. But in general, I think most horror ages better. And the thing is, once it ages out some, like you said, this movie might not have stood out as much when it first came out in 95, 94, 95. Because it blended in.
Right.
But since all the crappy ones have since fallen away and no one really remembers them anymore, this one kind of sticks out.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of the same thing with music, where sometimes, like you said, where you don't really appreciate it till later because, you know, all the other crappy shit from around the same time
has disappeared.
Has been forgotten, and just the good stuff remains.
How would you rank this in Carpenter filmography?
Ooh, gosh.
Better than Prince of Darkness.
Yeah, I really don't like Prince of Darkness. As much as I want to like Prince of Darkness, I just can't. I can't muster it up. There's parts of it I love. There's parts of it that are brilliant.
It's not as good as The Thing.
No, hardly any movie is as good as The Thing.
I'd say it was maybe almost like Body Bags. It's a very different story, but at the same level.
I think it's better than Body Bags.
Yeah, because it's one story.
Because it's one story.
I got you. Yeah.
But I'm going to say, and we were talking about this when we were walking the other day, in general, other than this movie, in general, I think Carpenter is a better director when the stories are simpler and straightforward. Which maybe that might be why I sometimes forget that this is Carpenter, because this story is very kind of complex and you know, multi-layered and stuff. I feel like when he does movies like that, I don't like them as much. I think that's kind of the problem that I had with Prince of Darkness. It seemed like there were too many ideas stuffed in it and they weren't all that well delineated and they didn't really go together that well. I really didn't get the mechanism by which this was happening.
I think it's a better quality production than They Live.
It looks better than
Not quite as driving as They Live, because that's just very simple.
Yeah, it's a very straightforward idea.
I would probably put it on par with They Live in terms of Carpenter.
But
you know, I can't really group this in with Prince of Darkness and Thing. I just can't. I'd have to group this in more with Dagon. Yeah. Even though I kind of, out of the two, I kind of like the feel of Dagon better. But I would watch this along with Dagon and Reanimator and Bride of Reanimator and From Beyond, you know, like
if you were doing a Lovecraftian.
It's Lovecraft.
It almost strikes me as more a Lovecraftian movie than a Carpenter movie.
I would think so.
But if I had to rank it, like in the Carpenter, I actually think I like it a little bit better than They Live.
It's technical, it's bigger scope.
It's a bigger scope. Yeah. I tend to like I said, I tend to like
better.
Ambiguity. I tend to like those types. I like Lovecraftian fiction. Anything that has this kind of surrealist.
Do you know what? It's kind? This is almost kind of like a high quality The Fog. Yeah, a Lovecraft version.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. It's not quite as subtle as The Fog, right? Because I mean, The Fog was pretty much just a straightforward ghost story, but this has that kind of restrained. I don't want to say restrained. That's not really the right word, but
insidious kind of.
Yeah, that's a good. That's a good word. And it has like just these really nice, surreal little touches, like the kid on the bicycle, like the backwards head, like the little kids.
I'm gonna say it's an upscale The Fog and the Lovecraftian version.
That's probably a good way of putting it. Yeah. But yeah, it does seem like it's a little bit underappreciated. I feel like it's gotten more love in the last few years because, you know, the reviews I've read of it recently that have been done recently, a lot of people are saying, you know, this is a really, you know, it's really good and it's kind of forgotten. Really, definitely one of the better Carpenter movies. Easily the best Carpenter movie of the 90s. Yeah. You know, like I said, not a lot of competition in that area.
It aged well. Yeah. I want to see it again now. I have it on the Blu-ray, and you know, it's a regular Blu-ray release. It's, I think, the Screen Factory that released that. It wasn't. Yeah. Do you remember? Yeah. And the transfer looked fantastic.
It did look really nice.
It looked really good. So you can get that on eBay for probably around $10, $15. Yeah. It's a good buy.
And I ended up liking it a lot more. Like you said, when I think if I saw it in the theater, which I may have, or I saw it back in the mid to late 90s, it didn't make a huge impression. But when I saw it again...
Yeah, you're like, oh, okay,
I was kind of like, oh, yeah. It's like I kind of forgot about it. Yeah, so like you said, I think maybe the shitty movies from the 90s had faded.
The shitty movie from the 90s kind of drowned this one out. It kind of blended in with them in a certain way. But I think it was mostly the tone and the look of the 90s kind of obscured this one. It's good, though. In a way, it kind of felt like, what was that one, Seven? Yeah. It was called Seven. Yeah. And then Jacob's Ladder, and in a way, almost like that terrible Arnold Schwarzenegger film that kind of had that same look and feel. What was that terrible?
Oh, the apocalyptic one?
Yeah.
End of Days?
End of Days, yeah.
I hated that.
Garbage. And I love Schwarzenegger. I do like
And I love Gabriel Byrne. I saw that shit in the theater, and the only reason I went to see it was I was like, oh, it's about devils and Gabriel Byrne is in it.
Yeah.
But I really did not like it.
It was like they're trying to mash two genres together.
Yeah, it's like, let's make The Omen, but like an action movie.
But like an action movie.
And I'm like,
yeah, and it was neither.
That could work, but it wasn't that one.
Garbage. But there was something about the.
I told you it sucked though. You didn't believe me.
I have to experience suckage for myself. You know what I mean? I want to experience. You know what I mean? And I like Arnie. I just wanted to see how fucked up it was.
Yeah.
And End of Days is fucked up.
Yeah, I told you.
Terrible.
I told you it was fine.
Yeah, but I like that. Okay, I like the one about the clones. So what was it, the sixth day? That was good though.
Yeah.
I like that one.
I might have to watch that one eventually.
You'll like it, I think.
You think?
Yeah, it's good. It's almost kind of like, it reminded me of Total Recall, even though I loved the meta action of Total Recall.
Yeah.
And for you people know, look, he was back at Recall. He was tripping. He did not go to Mars. He did not get his ass to Mars.
Well, the thing about it is, and it's funny that you bring up Total Recall, because this movie kind of reminds me of Total Recall. Yeah, it has that meta. That's what it has that meta kind of thing going on where you're not really sure what's going on. Know what else it reminds me of a little bit? Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
It's a little bit, it has an aspect of a Twilight Zone kind of episode, but a really, really good one and a really big high budget one. It reminds me of that also.
Right.
But like I said, it's good because I think it really needs a revisit, because I think if you saw it at the time, it might not have been like...
Yeah, I saw it at the time and I was like, meh.
Well, and Carpenter's stuff in the 80s... But I see it now and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. And Carpenter's stuff in the 80s was so good that I think some of his 90s stuff kind of pales by comparison. So, I'm not saying all his 90s movies
it was the Carpenter, Cronenberg kind of thing that was going on at that time. Impressed our generation. This is a 90s version of that. This could have easily been done by Cronenberg.
It does seem, it does seem kind of Cronenbergian.
You're right. We're just not making that association because it looks and feels so 90s. But this...
Which is funny because, and if you kids are younger, I mean, we're in our 40s now, but when it was the 90s, I didn't really notice a look of the 90s.
Yeah, until now.
Until later, and then you're looking back going, oh my god, that's the most 90s thing imaginable. Even though when you're in it, it doesn't really...
Yeah, and it doesn't... it's not like the sets look 90s or the people look so 90s, although it does in certain respects. There was a certain tone to horror movies of the 90s. Yeah. In the same way, there was a certain tone to horror movies of the 80s. Yeah. And the 90s tone, I got really burned out on it quick. Because there were just so many of them, most of them were shit.
Well, and I think the thing about 90s horror movies in general, a lot of them, and even a lot of them now when I re-see them again, a lot of them came off as very generic. I don't know if it was the cinematography. I don't know if it was just the way the actors looked. I don't know if it was the script writing. I can't put my finger on it.
And there was
but they all looked similar.
It was like a generic 90s satanic / goth kind of thing, and it was a mainstream interpretation of gothic, and it was just...
Maybe that's what made me mad.
Yeah, it was like as if Walt Disney was giving you gothic, Yeah, I mean, it was
almost kind of like Hollywood just discovered goth, and now we have to put that in every movie.
Yeah, and they're burning.
I'm like, here I am, been here since 1983. Yeah. You guys are just like making this really slick interpretation. Yeah. Not to shit on some of the movies because
some of them were good.
Because I like The Craft, for example. Yeah. And things like that.
The first two Blades were pretty good.
I like those. So so I don't want to shit on it too much, but this one didn't really have that problem so much, but it still kind of had that look. And like I said, there were other movies out that were kind of like this.
Yeah, The First Crow.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
Right.
Like Lord of Illusions and stuff. So, so it was a similar kind of thing going on. And for all those kind of generic 90s movies, I blame Scream. I like Scream. It's a great movie. It's a classic. Yeah. But the shit that came in its wake, where now all the 90s horror after that had to be ironic and self-referential and jokey and shit like that, that really kind of pissed me off. So I'm kind of glad that era passed. And now people are actually taking horror seriously again and actually making really good, creepy, allegorical horror movies.
Some of these independent horror movies that we're seeing on Netflix are excellent.
There are some really, really good ones out there.
Very good, yeah.
I mean, I have been very pleasantly surprised. Because I always said, when I was growing up, I said, I don't want to be one of those crabby old people who's like, oh, these kids today, blah, 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 and stuff like that. So I do try to, when I have time to, I do try to keep up with new indie horror and stuff like that. And a lot of the new stuff I've seen has been fantastic.
Yeah, well, they're getting away from the Hollywood scene, and they're doing it locally with their own people and their own money and their own equipment, doing what they want to do, and they're able to get it released. It's awesome.
And a lot of them are even if they're younger than us, they seem to be fans of the same horror movies that we grew up watching.
Well, the movies that actually started some of these labels, like Phantasm, they were little programs. They were just, Friday the 13th, they were just little homemade films,
Pretty much,
And, in a way, that's how Carpenter got his start.
Well, and I was going to say, the guy that wrote In the Mouth of Madness, I mean, he was head of New Line Cinema. New Line Cinema, I think, was started by Roger Corman.
Right.
They called that studio in the 80s, they called it the house that Freddy built, because Nightmare on Elm Street was an independent film. They made it. They made shit tons of money. Yeah. And then it went on to become a much bigger company because of that franchise.
Right.
Yeah, so a lot of the horror from that era started out as independent, and then later on got picked up by big studios.
Yeah, the creativity always comes from, independent stuff.
Yeah, and I mean...
And then Hollywood picks it up and runs it into the ground. Just like custom motorcycles. Cool shit never comes from manufacturers. It comes out of some dude's garage. Movies are like that.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is, I'm not saying all independent movies are good, because a lot of them suck.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of... I've seen a lot of really crappy independent movies, too.
It's just like in nature. It's a swamp. It's a quagmire of natural selection. The good stuff will eventually kind of rise to the top.
Yeah.
And that's what you're seeing.
But I mean, we've like mentioned some newer movies on...
and some shit's so bad that it rises to the top. Look at Manos, Hands of Fate. That shit is so bad that it's good.
But there's something like intriguing about it. There's something really creepy about that movie.
Yeah, it's like it was a movie made by some crazy
and I think that Joel and the Box kind of nailed it when they did it on the original back in season 5 or whatever, when he said every frame of this movie looks like someone's last known photograph.
Exactly. That's what it was
I was like, that is a very succinct.
It's like they were filming a crime.
Yeah, like a snuff film. It definitely has that feeling to it. That's why it's so why it's so beloved.
And that they're being forced to do this.
Right. I can only film 30 seconds at a time, just so and I can't, and I don't have sound.
Everybody looks like they're forced to be in this movie.
I know, they really do. I know, that's why it's so. They should
they're at gunpoint. Say your lines.
I think they're making a sequel. Like the girl that played Debbie in that movie, she has a Facebook group, and I'm on it because that was her dad that played the master.
It's like Birdemic. Remember Birdemic?
Yeah.
Oh god,
I kind of loved Birdemic, but I can't.
So bad.
I can't figure out if they were legitimately trying to make a good movie or if they were just said fuck it.
They said fuck it. So it had to been some kind of a corporate effort. Like, I'll make your movie for your corporation. I'll plug you. Just give me the money and I'll make it. It was just some hack.
What was with the guy?
Some hack did it, and it was just so hackish that it rose out of the quagmire.
It became brilliant.
Like I said, it was natural selection. It rose itself out of the quagmire.
The Room.
What? Yeah.
I mean, that guy thought that he was making like a masterpiece of cinema. It's not a horror movie. It's like a kind of a romantic comedy or drama. I can't figure out what it was supposed to be.
Yeah.
But it was so bad.
Yeah.
That it became awesome again.
No.
I almost feel like you can't do that on purpose because like the Sci-Fi Channel makes like Sharknado and stuff like. If you're making like a parody on purpose, like you're trying to make it bad on purpose, it's just not going to work.
No.
You have to think you're making the best movie ever.
You need that earnestness organically.
You need that earnestness. That's what makes it funny.
Yeah.
Is like we actually think...
It has to be somebody who really thinks that this is an awesome movie.
Everybody thinks they're good actors. Everybody thinks the special effects are good.
Right.
Then, if it sucks, then it's beautiful. It's a thing to behold. You know what I mean? And I think that's kind of what happened with Manos. Everyone thought they were making a good movie. Yeah. I think.
But what was weird is it ended up kind of coming back going, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I can totally there's something kind of comforting about it. All right, but anyway.
Let's get back to the
all right, so we were talking about John Carpenter, but we were pretty much
pretty much covered.
Like I said, I don't want to ruin it too much, but the thing about it is the plot is not really the most important thing about this. It's really more about the atmosphere. The statement that it makes. You know, a lot of the imagery, it has really, really cool, like creepy, surrealistic kind of imagery.
Yeah, if you liked other Carpenter flicks, you'd like this one.
And if you like Lovecraftian kind of
true.
stuff.
Imagine Lovecraft meets The Fog, kind of like that.
Oh, speaking of Lovecraft, someone had on YouTube has recommended. We saw Call of Cthulhu, the black and white one, right? That one was super
I like
awesome.
That one.
Okay, that same studio has made another one.
Okay.
They made, I think it was Whisperer in the Darkness.
Okay.
So we're definitely going to have to look that up and see it because I really, really like that.
Maybe we ought to do a show on both of them.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Okay.
Since we're doing
Lovecraft, we'll just put those two in the series.
Yeah.
All right.
So that'll do it for this installment of our movie retrospective series. Remember to check out our regular show that comes out every Tuesday and our movie reviews that come out every Friday. And if you'd like to financially support the show, you can go to our Patreon page or go to our blog, which is 13o'clockpodcast.wordpress.com. And there's a link in the sidebar to a PayPal account if you would like to make a one-time donation. We will see you next time. Bye.